So this year, Life Science Panorama is the 10th edition, and the format is hybrid. This meeting now at this time is virtual to accommodate participants on the other side of the Atlantic, but we will have a networking event later tonight in the Boston area that has already sold out. So a few words about this meeting. The format, it's a meeting short, 1 hour and 30 minutes long. Each panel consists in a 30-minute discussion with the panelists and 10 minutes Q&A. We encourage you to ask a question through the chat. I will go to the moderator. And we are thinking of organizing a follow-up a little bit later, depending on the question that you have, to address the question that will not be addressed due to the lack of time. So stay tuned. There will be a follow-up to this meeting. So this year, it is more than ever about financing life science innovation. So what drives value for investors in a post-pandemic environment? Jim, the floor is yours.
Oh, thanks, Laure. Merci à tout le monde qui, de la France, et je vous remercie aussi for the American audience as well. We have on our panel a couple of really terrific folks. We're going to talk about this value and how value is perceived given the tragedy that is the current state of the market and market valuation. So with that, I'm going to introduce the first two of our panel. And so we've got Arda Ural, who is with Ernst & Young for you old folks, which is now rebranded as EY. He's the head of the life sciences there and has published some really compelling statistics and information on the current state of the life sciences. And we'll put a link in the chat and you can link to some of those reports. We also have Vinit Nijhawan. So he is with MassVentures, and in a few minutes we'll be joined with our third panelist, and that is Philippe Lopes-Fernandes. And he is the executive VP, member of the board at Ipsen. With that, I'm going to start with a quote from Vinit that I thought was rather compelling. Vinit, you said that we've had our .com moment. Can you elaborate on that and maybe talk to us for a second about where you think, where we are and where the near-term and long-term prospects are, and from a value perspective?
Yes, of course. So thanks very much, and hello to everyone. You know, I was a tech entrepreneur back in the 80s and 90s, and for us in the technology entrepreneurship world, the .com boom, which I think many of you have probably heard about, but maybe have not experienced, happened around starting about mid-90s to, you know, March 10th, 2000, when NASDAQ peaked. And it was obviously built around sort of the internet, you know, bubble. And by 1999, any startup could get funded, right? I mean, I literally was with one startup. We had one meeting with a VC and we got $3 million. And I saw the parallels with what's happened here in the last couple of years, particularly sort of also, you know, jet fueled by the pandemic. Something similar that happened here in life sciences, you know, over the past 2 or 3 years. And while it isn't as dramatic a bust as the .com bust was, where the stock markets all dropped precipitously over 12 months, we're seeing a version of that here in life sciences. I think that's what I was referring to, Jim.
Yeah, and you know, on that point, one of the points of discussion that we had was that there were a number of companies that went public. I think we tracked the oncology space. There were 78 companies that went public from 2020 to 2022. And those values have dropped. Their IPO, post-IPO valuations have dropped by about 60 to 65%. And that continues to this day. So Arda, you talked a little bit about our sugar high. And I think that was in reference to some of these companies that went public and maybe they shouldn't have.
Right. Look, I think the pandemic really demonstrated to the investor community that how vibrant the biotechnology and pharmaceutical business was, and many investors kind of rushed in. That boosted the historical valuations, all pharma, medtech, biotech, medtech to a lesser extent, but they went up to I think unsustainably high values, which Vinit I think called as the dot-com bubble for biotech version. So in that, what I call the sugar high, because of that, just the fundamentals of the valuations were maybe not justified at that time. So what that led to the investors to do is typical biotech IPO playbook was thrown out. So you would typically go to the phase 2 through some rounds of Series A, B, C, and then that becomes your either mezzanine or kind of go to public, raise your 100 million plus for your phase 3. Partner or go alone or some hybrid model, and then you kind of go IPO, and then that's kind of the risk shifts from the early investors to the public. So that book was thrown out, and that cycle was accelerated, maybe to the detriment of some of the investors who joined in the public markets, and the risk was shifted from the early investors to the public, maybe too soon, to the point that our latest analysis, our team kind of polled, shows about 37% of the biotechs have less than 1 year worth of cash. So what we will be seeing moving forward is a kind of a game of attrition or a lot of concessions to be made, either in terms of headcount reduction, just deprioritizing certain elements in the certain assets in the pipeline. And they just need to get across the desert, if you will, to the next milestone.
Right, and hoping there's an oasis somewhere in between here and there, right?
Yeah, I mean, innovation always, I mean, there is going to be oasis down the road because the innovation is very robust. We can talk about it later in the panel. But I'm hopeful in the long term, just it's going to be a very painful near to midterm transition period.
Yeah, and that's what I think we really wanted to focus in on is it was always about this perception of value. And before it was, as somebody, as the chief business officer from Pfizer, Amar Malik, described it, as they were looking for compelling science. And it used to be about the how things worked, not what do they do and what market does it appeal to. I think the shift in value perception now has moved or is moving quite dramatically from this bleeding edge, cool, sexy science to much more practical applications. And tell me about your revenue model. So for example, it was again, Pfizer's chief business officer said, they're looking for deals that are going to generate revenue between 2025 and 2030. So that means, obviously, it does not mean preclinical assets. It's probably too short a runway for most of those. But they're looking for real assets addressing real patient populations in real markets. So how are you seeing that play out in your respective domains?
Well, obviously one of those oases that will happen is M&A, right? So some of it will be attrition, but some of it will be consolidation. And, I think the consolidators are no longer just pharma, right? We've got a bunch of biotechs that have broken out of the pack and are starting to acquire good science. So, and they're not thinking 2025. I mean, Vertex, for example, right? So that would be one insight.
Like another dynamic, Jim, that's happening in the backdrop is what I call the innovation deficit. So pharma has been fairly active, but that activity did not necessarily lead to productivity for the R&D. And it's been also squeezed by the top line degradation by coming of age with the biologics. So if you look at 2024 to 2026, there is a $225 billion worth of loss of exclusivity, primarily driven by biologics. And it's not just our analysis, everybody's kind of coming up with the same numbers if you kind of forward-looking statement of the top line of the industry. So this is not de minimis in terms of the revenue, but also compared it to 2010, 2014, when the first patent cliff we lived through, those of you who were around operating in the business. So that was about 100 billion. So we are living like double all that. and happening in a very short period of time, in a couple of years. So the statement you read is very accurate for pretty much all pharma. So what do they do about it? So they will go, number one, they need to double down on some of the assets to accelerate them to market. Number two, squeeze more juice out of their existing in-market products. And number three, go do bolt-on assets. But those assets don't exist at the scale that they need to make up for that loss. And that's, I think, going to create a squeeze.
So in other words, these super niche, super small markets that while compelling from an investor perspective before, and that's because of the risk, right? So the risk of going after a 3,000 patient indication, right, when these orphan or ultra orphan indications was always compelling. The trials were small, the investment was small, and then you could charge $3 million on the back end for each patient. But even still, that's not going to fill the pipeline or fill the deficit. A $200 billion deficit is not going to be done with onesies and twosies. So what's the alternative? I mean, what kinds of things are valuable now? Is it indication? Vinit, you had mentioned that the digital is something that is compelling and that is now really coming up, growing up and growing into the biotech, pharma, and life sciences world. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, an example would be Click Therapeutics, right? Local company raised, tens of millions of dollars, but they're very focused on, adjuvant or adjunct therapies to pharma.
Mm-hmm.
So they've created a whole pipeline of digital therapies, initially neurological, focused on neurological diseases. I also think the impact on digital in creating more productivity in drug discovery. So Arda was talking about the fact that productivity hasn't really increased much. I think there's a real opportunity for an impact on productivity, using digital or machine learning or other, techniques like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also on the non-digital front, who knows, but maybe cell and gene therapy will come in just when the biologics are cliffing off. So, but in order for them to become serious contenders, we're going to have to find a way to scale and get costs down.
Well, cell and gene therapy are both very intriguing and potential game changers, but it feels like the risk is still really, really high with those, whereas it took biologics decades for people to get comfortable with the manufacturing, get it up to scale, understand the side effects, understand the safety profile, and really become experts in the biologics. Arda, do you think we're anywhere near that with these cell and gene therapies?
I think maybe two-part question, one on the digital, two on the cell and gene. And we have been kind of combining them for the last 10 years. We should probably start talking about cell therapies and gene therapies because they have different modalities for. So number one, I think what exists out there to plug in that hole. Rare disease is certainly a big unmet medical need, and they can be making a big difference for the patients. They're typically monogenic mutations that can be addressed, and we have seen some successful examples from companies that can address that particular gene or replace it through viral vectors and some significant clinical outcomes. So that is very promising. On the cell therapies, I think I think we may have talked in the prep session. There are about 2,000 clinical trials in cell and gene therapies combined. That's going on right now, up from even the beginning of the year, that was like 1,584.
You got to say that again. I want to make sure people heard that.
2,000 clinical trials at any given phase for cell and gene therapy. So that the industry is betting big on that. And so that is clearly a path for innovation. But the question you asked is like, is it big enough? I think that's to be seen because the pricing power and the ability to treat a disease or cure a disease is phenomenal. So that dynamic got to be seen. I'm curious how the payers are approaching to that. I can, debrief my conversation with the payers. It's, I think, interesting. Can the system support it is the question.
Well, the Hep C, I mean, we learned a lot with the Hep C. So when that drug came on market and they priced it, it was like $93,000 per 12-week treatment course. And we learned that there was some obvious pushback, but eventually they gave in and realized that it was actually value add in order to cure the disease.
Yeah, I think the industry wasn't ready maybe to commercialize a cure because your health economics model would say I'm preventing $1 million liver transplantation with $84,000 a kind of a cure therapy, not like just showing a couple pills on a picture and then saying these are $84,000. That was, I think, misled by stakeholders at the time. So I think that should be a lesson learned for all of us, how to get the right narrative for curative therapies down the road. That was, I think, tremendous impact, positive impact, and then tremendous learning for the industry. You also asked, Jim, seconds ago about the digital. Digital has two, I think, implications. One on the, and Vinit kind of spoke to it. One is on the discovery capabilities, right? The protein folding capability, and that was like not done in ages versus done in minutes now.
Yeah.
To digitalizing the back office systems to lower your cost base so that you can kind of revert that capital, reallocate that capital back to investment. I think those two are still untapped potentials for pharma, either back office optimization and or front R&D capabilities or commercialization capabilities. And welcome, Philippe, by the way. So.
Yeah, well, you know, as far as bienvenue, Philippe. We're discussing the shift in the value as we had before, and right now we're sort of focusing in on these digital aspects, these digital technologies that really do seem to be true value adds to pharma. Well, we know on the discovery side, I mean, these companies that are doing early stage drug discovery have been around for maybe 10 or so years. And more are coming online, and they're getting gobbled up by pharma. So I think I don't know if that's crested or if we're on the downslope or the upslope. Remains to be seen. But there's obviously perceived value in these digital approaches from the drug design and discovery perspective. We know that there's a lot of folks that are trying to work on these databases on the back end. That seems to be a place where the value is needed. Given the data size, data sets. So we're getting these gene-seq, right, RNA-seq data coming out that no human could possibly understand. So from your perspective, Philippe, and for the audience, I should probably just introduce. So Philippe, again, Philippe Lopes-Fernandes is the Executive Vice President, Chief Business Officer at Ipsen. From the digital side, how does somebody like a mid or large pharma think about these digital approaches?
All right. So thank you, James, and terrible sorry for being late. I was trapped in a board meeting, but you know, I sincerely apologize. What we have as when we look at these digital therapies, we are definitely intrigued by the possibilities, and what we've learned in the past, in the recent past, is that these, you know, the potential of these therapies is tremendous. That being said, we're also wondering about how are we going to be able to monetize that? And we know that it's definitely not easy. There's a lot of discussions in the US, in Europe. You know, Germany has been actually a precursor. France is getting there, but you know, it's still odd for a lot of payers to pay about a digital therapy.
Right, and you know that it feels like digital is sort of a catch-all, and as Arda was describing, it's in different flavors. So there's the preclinical digital or artificial intelligence, to use a horrible term, sorry everyone, or overused term. But it's effective, and it's proven effective. I mean, there are molecules that are coming forward that appear to be really quite good and novel. From the discovery perspective, there's the digital computational power that artificial intelligence can bring to these very complex omic data sets. And we've got omics, you know, from every direction these days. And then there's the digital health, where folks are delivering digital solutions through phones, through apps, through wearable devices. So it comes in lots of flavors, and we think that there's some real value added there. But I did want to go back to this monoclonal antibody thing and these biologics. One of the biggest successes most recently is this conjugation of a HER2 targeting drug, biologic, with an isotopomerase inhibitor. So these isotopomerase inhibitors are old, right? They're decades old, very toxic drugs, but they're being targeted using one of these HER2 targeting antibodies. And that drug is expected to have north of $5 billion in annual sales. So does anyone want to sort of talk about the value of these older approaches and breathing new life into them?
Let me kind of go, and then I'm sure Vinit and Philippe will have opinions as well. I think the ability, I almost like draw the analogy, Jim, to what you said, to finding this fossilized DNAs and then not to be able to do anything versus like now, after 20, 30 years. I think the Nobel winning scientist did that exactly with the Neanderthal DNA, right? They couldn't do much about it. Now they can because the technology caught up to the aspirations. I think that's exactly where we are by revisiting some of the older modalities, how they can be now used for better targeting, better combining with the newer technologies. And also, I think you made a point about the digital therapeutics, which maybe a shameless plug here. For if you're a investor or an innovator for digital therapeutics, we are hosting a December 13 in New York offices, a session for about 100+ people to come together and then do some speed dating on the digital therapeutics with the founders and investors. So you reach out to me. I'm happy to send you an invite. So there's a lot of promise.
If you want to, just on that note, Arda, if you want to send it to us, we can put it on either the chat or later on we can put it on the website, on our website, and we'll be able to send people your way.
Yeah, and Jeff, absolutely. Jeff and I worked way back, so a lot of respect for what he's doing in ConcertAI. So I will, Jim, send it over to you, and then the organization can forward that. It's in New York City, December 13th.
Oh, terrific. Vinit, so what's your take on this breathing new life into old approaches?
Well, these kind of cycles happen in every area of technology, right? And I was just sort of grinning inside a little bit when you brought that up, because I remember 30 years ago there was, Vertex launched around this concept of rational drug design, right, around crystallography and all that. And so, these things sort of build on themselves, and we know the big problems we need to go after. One is, we need to understand the biological mechanism of action, and and academia continues to work on that en masse. And so when we unveil biological mechanism of actions on some of these old things, we get now we have a scientific understanding of why they work and for what reasons. And the second are just all the productivity tools, such as these machine learning tools, such as visualization tools that we're getting down to being able to visualize at a cell level in many different ways. So yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised, right? Because this is exactly what happens in kind of every area of technology.
Sure. Well, yeah.
Maybe I want to come back to the productivity tools. I mean, you heard my excitement about the digital therapies, and whether it's full therapy or a way to manage side effects of treatment, but the tools to be used to increase to speed or minimize risks through the discovery and development of therapies is something that is also extremely exciting, extremely important, and probably not used enough yet. When you look at the probability of success of a phase 1 now, I mean, it's still something between 10 and 15% probability of getting to market. It's the same that what it was 10 or 15 years ago. It doesn't make sense. It should be much higher. We have made progress in scanning, in preclinical and in early clinical that should translate into a higher productivity and a higher probability of success.
So
we need to have that as an.
That's an excellent point. So if after 20 years of doing things a certain way, we're not seeing any gains in productivity, does that beg the question? Are we barking up the wrong tree with some of these approaches?
Or are we too much of a traditional industry that because we're regulated and because it's complex, we tend to do the same thing over and over?
So how would disruption, if you were, and this will tie into the innovation panel, which is panel number 2, but how would disruption be met? So someone comes up with an innovation, something different, a different approach, a different modality, and all of a sudden they approach the market and the market says, you're not traditional, go away. How does innovation break in with such a traditional thinking industry?
Like, I think this is, I mean, the disruptive innovation, if we knew how to do it, we would just do it or write a book about it if we didn't know how to do it. So it is very contextual and also it's opportunistic too, right? So a great scientist may not articulate the value to a venture capital group and or a very competent venture capital group may miss the opportunity. If you look at the RNA, just in general, discovered in 1963, right? We haven't seen an messenger RNA until like recently, and this is just a phenomenal 11-month, development end to end, which hopefully, I mean, the book's already been written about it, but hopefully humanity will remember that. So innovation is very unpredictable. If we could put a process around it, we would, right? And that would help.
Yeah, where would RNA be if it weren't for COVID? So Vinit, you were smiling, so and it was a devilish smile.
Yeah, so and maybe because I'm the one sort of tech person on this panel, I think where I've been looking for this innovation is that intersection of computing and biology, right? And we're going to see lots and lots of innovation, not just in sort of drugs and drug discovery, but also in things like simulation. I mean, maybe we could find a way to increase that 10 to 15% to a higher number if we had a digital twin of, of the human being or the organ that or of the liver for toxicology studies.
Yeah. And so you're familiar with Don Ingber's company. So Don Ingber being the founding director of the Wyss Institute. So he started Emulate. Yep. They did lung on a chip and liver on a chip and, pretty much everything on a chip.
Exactly. And, I just funded another of Don's companies. He's on the board with me. That's in the diagnostic space, which is also bringing those kind of materials. And so there are other disciplines that you wouldn't typically think of are starting to intersect, right?
Yeah.
And academia knows this. The Wyss Institute that Don created is all about that. It's all about creating that interdisciplinary collisions, right? And so I think that's where innovation is going to be. I mean, it's a broad statement, but
yeah. Well, I don't want to step on Gigi's panel. So we want to continue with the value.
One more comment that is not that is going to sound a bit trivial. And first, I fully agree with your point, Vinit, and that was the point that I was going to make on the innovation. But you did it much better than me. Me not being a scientist. The other path is, why is it taking so much time to get patients into clinical trials? And are there ways that we could use now to accelerate clinical trials by just finding the patients, finding the right patients, and recruiting them into clinical trials in a much easier way? And again, it might not change the probability of success, but it might change the path to success in a tremendous way. And let's not forget that when we bring something in the clinic, there's patients waiting. So if we tell these patients you need to wait 5 years versus 3 years, it's going to be a huge difference. So and again, we're not using enough the tools yet that could help
I'm glad you brought up clinical trials. So with Arda's comment about the 2,000 trials in just cell and gene therapy alone, plus the, Arda, I think you told me the immune oncology number of drugs, is like some just obscene
obscene number. That quote belongs to another venture capitalist in New York's 8,000 immuno-oncology products. So
you got to say that again. 8,000.
I mean, it's just going to be some, I think, Darwinian selection there based on, are you still good like a fifth line therapy in conjunction with another therapy? Is it still valuable? I think it goes down to the question of innovation. You got to focus on the unmet medical needs, which is the core value proposition of any pharma company or biotech company, and then think out of the box. I think don't try to over manage a process that the inventors can do faster than you as a biopharma company. Let the investors kind of take the risk, and then you can serve as an accelerator. I think that's maybe the magic that we need to figure out better.
Yeah. So with that, and I think we're I think this is Q&A time. Laure, is that right? Are we at the time? I just want to make sure we don't keep going on this. Are we? Yeah. Okay. So we did get a question. So this is, why do small companies, and Arda, this goes right to the point you just made. Why do small companies who are doing disruptive work carry the risk from a finance perspective?
I think that's the nature of the business, the risk reward that you're putting to work. There's no downside, if you will, other than some sweat equity and a small investment money. I think that's the nature of how our industry is built. You go with a high risk, high reward proposition, and hopefully when you show some proof of concept at some level, the big fund comes and takes you to the next level, and then you give up some equity, and then hopefully you have so much down the road to come back to you. And it's really kind of predicated by the fact that you got to focus on unmet medical need, not the Me Too and like a 7,999 like immuno-oncology is not going to get you there.
Well, but and Vinit, I know you want to say something, but I want to tie a couple things that you've said. So if we're talking about value and investors are valuing these companies, even though it's the 8,000th clinical study for an immuno-oncology drug, and it seems like there's just no end. This played out before with with other classes of drugs. So clearly somebody sees value. Is it the conservatism? Is it Me Too? Is it I don't understand this, so I'm just going to follow, quote, smart money? And there's a lot to be said about that. Vinit, what do you think?
Well, look, it is a market, so there's demand and there's supply, right? The demand, frankly, keeps increasing because of our academic institutions. Our academic institutions they've always done good research, but increasingly faculty are in what we call Pasteur's quadrant. They're doing increasingly doing research with an eye towards commercializing. And so if you just look at the spin-outs coming from Massachusetts academic institutions, we're up to about 130 a year. So that's the demand side. The supply side of venture money, tries to track that, but there's always lags, right? And so there's always more demand than supply. And so the smart money should be more selective, right, of the places that they want to take bets on. But it's so hard at this early stage, Jim, to know. It's really hard to know kind of, which things are going to break out of the pack. If Philippe is talking about 10 or 15% at phase one, at this early stage, it's even a lower probability of the things that might turn into success. And that's why they keep making these bets.
Yep.
And on the other side, I mean, it's what Arda was saying. It's there's not a rule that says that a large company cannot engage at an earlier stage. It's also the bet from the of the investor of the early stage companies to say, what can I do to invest reasonable money to attract a big partner with the highest ratio between the money invested and the multiple that I can get. If you do a deal too early, the return is going to be more disappointing because, of course, the partner is going to take most of the risk. So it's finding the right time. Sometimes it's at DC, sometimes it's at IND, sometimes it's at end of phase 1 or phase 2. But it depends on the risk appetite of the investors.
So,
and James, actually, one thing on Philippe's point, I think, look, we lived through a free money period of 20, 30 years, right? The balance sheet of the Fed was less than 2 trillion about 2012.
mm-hmm.
Now it is like just scratched 9 trillion and coming down, hopefully down to 7 in the end of next year. So that also made it easier for those bets to happen. Now the cost of capital is not zero. So I think that's going to also weigh in on some. We have a lot of cash in the pharma land, right? We got 1.2 trillion worth of dry powder, but that will also, I suspect we will see some impact there at some point.
And the impact that you suspect that we'll see, is that going to be driven more towards these value propositions, or is it still going to be funding preclinical companies and taking them IPO with $1 billion pre-money valuations?
I think the narrative will shift from what platform do you have to show me the product.
Show
I
me
think
the
that's
product.
what's going to shift.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're already seeing that on the investment side. It always used to be, platform, but more and more people are saying, what's the beachhead?
Yeah. Well, that pendulum swings a lot. It feels like, but I'm glad to see it's more in the camp of the product. It seems to be, if the goal here from a value perspective is to fill the pipelines, then it has to be product focused as opposed to these platforms.
Hey, Jim, I see there's a question here from somebody that asked the question, beyond financial returns, is there a role for VCs to play in helping direct money towards high unmet needs, albeit at lower return levels? I don't think that's the right equation. I mean, if it's a high unmet need, it's a pretty good likelihood that you'll have a high return. And so absolutely VCs are looking for those kind of opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, I have a slightly different stand on that one. I think VCs have been putting a lot of money into new modalities, into high-risk programs, and they are absolutely doing a huge job at promoting innovation that is super high risk. Now, if with the increase of the rates and the uncertainties on pricing, what you could get to in a worst case scenario is VCs investing into things that are far less risky because you don't want to take the risk of a new modality, and you're going to go for marginal innovation just because it's not worth the risk. So if you don't have the return, be careful about what you wish. The VCs have the money could be employed in many other ways, and I think that right now we need also a healthy environment with good returns for our industry. We are a very special industry. When Boeing or Airbus wants to build a plane, they know that they are going to build a plane. They don't know if it's going to be a commercial success. We never know if we are going to make it to the patient.
Yeah.
And
so we have a few minutes left, and we've got a large number of our audience are based in Europe. So here in the U.S. and in Boston in particular, we tend to love what we do, but I think there is a huge untapped market of talent in Europe, and doing tools, services, unique services, coming up with different modalities, treatments, artificial intelligence. Is there any trend that we're seeing from the U.S. In Europe? Are we seeing investments? We know it's very heavily weighted towards the U.S., but are we beginning to see a movement towards acknowledging the fact that there's great stuff coming out of Europe?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly. I'll use a tech parallel. So obviously, the majority of the .com kind of boom investments went into U.S. companies, but following that, there was a mini boom in Europe, right? And there were a lot of fast follower companies in Europe who, like Rocket and others, who basically replicated the Amazons, the Googles, whatever, in Europe. And I think that same thing is happening already. I mean, I see startups, you know, obviously we've seen startups today from France, but startups coming from all parts of Europe who are just as sophisticated. The big difference is, you know, the US has got generational success. And so a key element is not just the science, is that entrepreneurial champion, right? And we've got many of those, you know, serial entrepreneurs who have, like Jeff Elton, who's on this call, who'll be on the next panel, you know, who've done it over and over again.
Yeah.
And VCs like to back those kind of people. It lowers their risk, you know, their management risk.
Yes.
And Europe doesn't have that.
Yeah, not enough, and that would have been my answer. I think the science in Europe is very strong. There should not be a problem in later stage where, you know, a lot of money can come from all over the world. It's okay. The early investments, you know, need to also come a bit more from Europe. But a key problem is there's not a strong enough network of biotechs in Europe, and biotechs entrepreneurs that have the experience of going through that. And
I think
it's tough.
I think the ecosystem is a big deal here, and you know, someone in Cambridge or Palo Alto will have a much, I think, fertile ecosystem to work with. The network effect, I think Philippe was just talking about, is real, and network not like who you know, but the network effect as the informatics that I think plays a big role. The other thing is a lot of companies moved their research centers to Boston, right, to Massachusetts over the years. So that's going to get even like accelerated or accentuating the network effect and the ecosystem effect. And in 70% of venture money is in 3 centers, like San Francisco, Boston, and New Jersey. So that's I think is a reality, and maybe collaborations and partnerships can make that. It's not like we don't have the intellectual capital in Europe. They just need to tap into these networks.
Well, that's part of the reason why the French-American Biotech Springboard was formed. So we recognized that there was this great science and it was looking to come to the US, but they didn't know how to position themselves either structurally or from a product or development perspective. Many of them did. Some of them are you know, certainly quite good, and we learned a lot from them. But we were really surprised at how many very sophisticated folks were coming over on the science side, who just didn't have some basic understandings about things like the capitalization table, which is, we'll be doing a panel tomorrow about with a group of French companies here. So I think we're
maybe,
almost.
You know, Arda, you said it's reality. I agree, it's reality. It's not fatality, and you know, we can move that. It takes time in biotech times. It's not something where you're going to change the world in 2 years. It's probably something that is going to be a 10 or 15 years effort, but there's, you know, the science is strong in Europe and we can do it.
Yep. Agree. We've seen some great, Tree Frog was a company that we mentored a number of years ago, and they've gone on to do some really, really terrific work, developing their company, growing their company, and they just relocated here to Boston. So, you know, sorry, friends. All right, so I think we're almost done. Yeah, I think we're on time right now, and I want to thank you all. It was really fascinating. There's so much more to be said about what is value and how are the ideas of value shifting right now. I think it's quite dynamic. And the next panel is going to talk about innovation, and then how the world of innovation is changing, and what people are looking at from an innovative perspective. So with that, I'm going to introduce Gigi Shafai. So she's one of the co-directors of the FABS. And Gigi, you ready? You want to take it away?
Thanks so much.